thanks everybody for joining this morning. And I mostly wanted to take time today to answer questions. Like I hope that ultimately is valuable, but to maybe seed the conversation. I've got maybe 15 minutes worth of slides here, 15 or 20. So we should have lots of time. I understand we have 40 minutes together total. So I'll do 15 or 20 minutes. Ask questions along the way. John, interrupt at any point. I don't see the chat at all. So if there are questions to be addressed, I'm happy to do that. So yeah, let's just get rolling. So I just want to say greetings to everyone. Good morning from Missoula, Montana. And as John shared, I'm Jason Taylor, Director of the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research. Although fairly new, I arrived just last July. After 11 years with the Department of Interior, I worked about half that time, 6 years with the National Park Service and 5 with the Bureau of Land Management, and spent my time in Colorado out on Cape Cod, and for the last 5 years up in Alaska. And my most recent position was as a superintendent at Klondike Gold Rush National Historical Park. But my thoughts and my growing up around the concept of wilderness, if you will, really came from my time in Alaska and working in the Arctic, which I've done over most of the last decade. So anyhow, quick introduction. So again, mostly today I want to answer questions. Start with an introduction to the Leopold and kind of the governance, how the Leopold Institute is organized, kind of what underpins this concept of research, and then a little bit of the work that we're just starting now. Not so much what we've been doing, but what's kind of on the docket, so to speak. And really, this is where I want to start here. So since our time together is about wilderness research, I wanted to address this question. Why do we even conduct research in wilderness? And there's probably 1,000 different ways and various philosophical takes on how to answer this question. But for me, the answer is it's simply because law and policy state this will be so. It's a matter of fact, it will be so. So to start with, the Wilderness Act specifies that wilderness areas shall be devoted to public purposes, one of which is scientific use. That's worth remembering. But more important, from day-to-day perspective, we think about how the bureaus, the Bureau of Land Management, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, the National Park Service, why does research matter to them in a wilderness context? And again, it's because if for no other reason, it's because law and policy dictate that it will be so. And so I've added a few examples here of what I mean. So if we look to our friends from the Forest Service, they're talking about scientific integrity and scholarly conduct here, but they note that scientific and scholarly activities are important because the information, this kind of information, is critical to making public policies. The Park Service, they have law that underpins this, right? So 54 US Code in relation to the National Park Service says that management will be enhanced by the availability and utilization of a broad program of the highest quality science. And further, NPS policy, if you look in Management Policies 2006, it says management in wilderness will include and be guided by a coordinated program of scientific inventory, monitoring, and research. Just a couple more here, bring our friends from the BLM into the conversation. So policy there states that the BLM will use science, local knowledge, partnerships, and volunteers to effectively manage, in this case, NLCS, it's old language, National Landscape Conservation System is what that stands for. The terminology now is NCL, National Conservation Lands. And the National Conservation Lands is the program within which wilderness resides within the BLM. Additionally, the BLM Wilderness Manual states the wilderness offers important and unique opportunities for research in areas that are relatively unmodified by modern people. These studies may improve wilderness stewardship and benefit both science and society. So this is I'm quite attracted or inspired by this notion of relatively unmodified by modern people, and it's really this point about modern people that strikes me. language that we should be using in this conversation more often, where our focus should be. And then certainly last, but absolutely not least, Forest Service wilderness management policy states that we will carry out research to increase understanding of wilderness ecology, wilderness uses, management opportunities, and visitor behavior. So we're effectively directed, right, to conduct research in and for wilderness, but there's a giant caveat here, or a nuance that's super important, that our research must be conducted in a manner that preserves wilderness character. The research has to be compatible with preserving wilderness. So to loop back to that opening point, why do we conduct research in wilderness? Again, there are many answers, but simply, it's because law and policy state that we will. Okay, one other kind of introductory piece here is I just want to make sure we all know who Aldo Leopold is. Many of you will already know that Aldo is considered the father of modern conservation, especially wildlife conservation in the United States. What you may not know is that Aldo Leopold was a Forest Service employee in the early 1920s. And it's because of Aldo or maybe his persistence, that's the reason why we have wilderness, or at least the reason why the first wilderness area was created in the United States in 1924, the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico. And of course, Aldo's work contributed to the eventual passing of the Wilderness Act in 1964. And it's for these reasons that our institute, the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute, bears his name. And I forgot to advance the slide, but just a graphic of the Gila Wilderness in New Mexico. All right, so the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute, it's a national interagency federal research facility located on campus at the University of Montana. We're fortunate that we're there. So we have the Leopold, the Research Institute, we have the Wilderness Institute at the University of Montana, and then we have the Arthur Carhart Wilderness Training Center also here on campus. And so it's a fantastic opportunity to bring a bunch of minds together to think about wilderness and try to do good things from research, training, and application perspectives. And it's worth saying that while it's absolutely true that many people in the Forest Service and elsewhere around the country and around the globe conduct wilderness relevant science, we're the only federal research group in the United States who's wholly dedicated to science to support wilderness stewardship. Our purpose is to advance wilderness stewardship through transformational science. And it's worth noting that the Leopold Institute was formally established in 1993, but preceded by a United States Forest Service Wilderness Research Institute that had been established in 1967, just after the Wilderness Act was signed. But 1993 is for us a fairly important year, not only because the Institute was formally designated in there that year, but it's also the year that our work transitioned from being wholly about wilderness and the Forest Service to becoming an interagency facility where our charge became the entire national wilderness preservation system. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. So a quick note on governance here. So we are, the Research Institute is administered by the Rocky Mountain Research Station, which is part of the Forest Service. But again, we are an interagency organization. So we're guided by and responsive to all four National Wilderness Preservation System Management Bureaus. So the BLM, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Park Service, and the National Park Service. And a part of this conversation too is the United States Geological Survey. They're part of our working group when we think about steering committees and policy councils. So again, our charge is to serve the wilderness research needs of all of these bureaus equally. We're a Forest Service unit, but our charge is interagency in scope. And toward that end, toward this notion of being interagency in scope, our work is guided by an interagency wilderness policy council, which is made up of all those organizations you see on the slide there. And we're a member of an interagency wilderness steering committee. All of that is with the intention of ensuring that the work that we do, the science that we do, is actually relevant to federal wilderness managers, to people like you on the ground. And I just want to It's almost a definitional piece. When I say Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute, wilderness in this case means units of the National Wilderness Preservation System. So all the soil, water, air, flora, fauna, landscapes, recreational opportunities, impact, drivers, climate change, pollution, so on and so forth. Everything that we think about that could be relevant to or is a driver of wilderness, that's our domain from a research perspective. And so it's all units, all 111 million acres, all 800 units, 300 or 400 or maybe many more managers, those charged with stewarding the National Wilderness Preservation System. It's really an impossible task, but we're trying. So geographically, our research takes us from the Southeast and Everglades wilderness in Florida, all the way to the far north and west in our largest and most intact wilderness areas in Alaska, places I hold dear and have been fortunate to spend some time up there. We have a fairly small staff, relatively small staff, but an extremely effective team. It's impressed me in the last year to learn the kind of the impact that a team of 7 or 8 scientists can have on a theme, on the concept of, or the idea of wilderness. So we have social scientists, biologists, ecologists, and so on. And we're super fortunate that, well, not so fortunate that we had one scientist recently retire. Many of you may know Carol Miller, fire scientist at the Institute for the last 20 years. She retired a few weeks ago. We recently advertised to hire a research ecologist behind her, and we hope to have that person on board here in the next couple months. And we recently were just approved to hire a scientist focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And I'll talk a bit more about that idea here in a few slides. And it's just worth knowing, thinking about this idea of research, that most of the staff at the Institute are what we call research grade scientists. And so it's more akin to an academic position, kind of in the structure, function, guidance, evaluation, and kind of reward structures that these positions have. And what that means practically is that there's a constant struggle, for lack of a better word on our part, to balance scientific independence, allowing the scientist to kind of follow the need, follow the science wherever it might take them, which is a charge that we have under the research grade evaluation guide. It's stated in policy that will be so, but we try to find the balance between that scientific independence and relevance, right? So making sure we're doing work that's explicitly relevant to federal wilderness managers or the broader wilderness stewardship community. So again, research grade scientists, but there's this balance between kind of scientific inquiry and independence and management relevance that we're striving for. There's a sweet spot in there somewhere. Before leaving the slide, I guess I want to also mention that we commonly host postdocs, students, visiting scholars of various forms at the Institute in Missoula. So if you're interested in spending some time with us, please reach out. We're happy to host you if an opportunity arises. And then speaking of visiting scholars, it's important to mention that we have a rich history of international collaboration in hosting international scholars and fellows, and we're always looking for opportunities to make new friends. Again, reach out if you're interested in spending some time with us. So our work is varied, but generally falls into one of 3 very broad categories: the science for wilderness, wilderness for science, and then wilderness from or within a landscape context. So thinking about landscape sustainability. So that first bin there, science for wilderness, this is about science and tools to effectively steward the land. This is where the Institute has historically spent most of its time, and likely where we're going to spend most of our time going forward. It's doing that work, conducting the research that can provide knowledge and tools to managers to help steward the lands most effectively. The wilderness for science piece is about using wilderness areas as scientific laboratories, if you will, and in part because As I mentioned with the BLM policy piece earlier, that the wilderness areas, and we all know this, are relatively free of the impacts of modern humans. The word relatively is important there, and modern humans. So they offer this unique opportunity for us to study the structure and function of ecological systems. They can also serve as baselines, right? So baseline, or provide baseline conditions to understand changes that we observe in areas outside of wilderness, the more managed environments. So that's Wilderness for Science. Wilderness for Landscape Sustainability is about understanding the value of wilderness to a broader landscape, whether it's ecological landscapes or economic landscapes or social landscapes, simply about how the impacts of wilderness propagate across broader landscapes beyond the boundaries of the wilderness area itself. An important point to mention here, we find this repeatedly, is that our work, while being focused on wilderness, has a much broader management and societal relevance beyond wilderness. Fire is a really good example. There's a long history of fire management work in wilderness, and many of the lessons learned from that wilderness research has been applied to fire management beyond the boundaries of wilderness. Then just a quick note about science planning. So all the work that we do is guided by what the Forest Service Research and Development component of the Forest Service calls science charters, science strategic plans. The Leopold Institute's first strategic plan or science charter was established in 1993 when the Institute was formed. It has had a second charter in the years 2005 to 2008. There were 2005, but a few tweaks there. And it's due now. We're actually working on this process now. And hopefully some of you have heard about this along the way, where we're trying to take a very deliberate and strategic approach to understanding wilderness research needs across a broad spectrum of managers within the United States, NGOs and tribes and hunting and fishing groups and diversity outdoor groups and international partners, to get a sense of where their needs are and allow those needs to guide our research agenda over the next 5 to 10 years. And where we're at in that process right now, roughly 2 weeks, we'll be blasting out a note to wilderness partners again around the country and the globe with 30 different very broad research topics that are relevant to wilderness, and asking people to rank those. So they're probably all important, or maybe they're all important, but we need to know what your most important needs are. And then through some social science tools, we'll basically try to harmonize those results and pull out of that, hey, what are the top 5 or top 10 broad research agenda items that we need to be focusing on, and allow that feedback to guide our research over the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, and then I'll end here with 3 examples of the kind of work we do. If you were part of the Tuesday session, this will just be an abridged version, that this first one about the benefits of wilderness report. But anyhow, I'll end with 3 examples, and they're all 3 interagency in scope and focused on priority stewardship needs. This is the only one that is nearing completion. The other 2 are just starting. So this first one is a forthcoming general technical report, which is related to the benefits of wilderness report. It was actually done by a group that was convened by the Leopold Institute back in 2014 when Wilderness Act turned 50, the Wilderness Economics Working Group. So this report does have an economic scope to it, not entirely, but largely there's an economic piece here, and certainly it touches on other topics too. It's worth noting that the potential for widespread relevance and use of this report, the science that's in this report, has led to additional review by the Forest Service Research and Development Washington office and the Office of Tribal Relations. There's a tribal chapter. It's fantastic that they're taking a closer look at that, which is where the report sits now. And as soon as this report is available, as I mentioned on Tuesday, we'll make it available through the distribution of wilderness and wild and scenic rivers managers around the country, and then out to forest supervisors and park superintendents and BLM field managers and so forth. We'll make sure everybody has access to it. So just a quick look inside the front cover. The report's 10 chapters long, nearly 200 pages, covers topics from the social relevance of wilderness to economic impacts, to use trends, to tribal values, and so on. And again, if you're interested to take a little bit deeper dive into this, if you can find the recording from Tuesday, I spend maybe 15 minutes introducing some of the chapters, and I won't do that today. So while not a wholly comprehensive review of the subject, this GTR, it's definitely an important contribution relevant to current conversations around the benefits of wilderness. And hopefully you can find time to at least flip through the pages once the report comes out. All right, the second of the three projects is one about climate. It's a climate change project, and it's generally developed around this notion about, actually somebody said, what the heck are we going to do about climate change in wilderness? And you know, there's been an interagency working group that has been testing this concept of RAD, resist, accept, or direct. So there's a decision framework around RAD. And so when you think about the climate change effects, do you resist them? Do you try to resist them? Do you just simply accept them, which would normally be in the kind of under the wilderness mantra, or do you direct their outcome? So there's a group that's been evaluating the RAD framework on public lands. What's been missing in this conversation, though, is what do we do about climate change in wilderness? So I think everybody knows this is already an impossible problem to address. But when you overlay wilderness laws and regulations and policies and ethos and ethics and public opinion, thinking about addressing climate change becomes even more challenging. And so this is a task that we're gonna take on. So to fill the wilderness gap in this RAD, resist, accept, direct decision framework, we're going to lead a multi-bureau team of scientists and managers to conduct an assessment of using RAD in wilderness. So we'll identify at least one study area for each of the 4 management bureaus: BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, and National Park Service. And we'll evaluate using RAD, considering factors such as biological or ecological implications, ethics, law, policy, public perceptions, and so on. So we're in the process right now of hiring a 3-year postdoc, which was funded by all 4 of the management bureaus to lead this work and convene working groups. And there's a lot more to come on this project. We are literally just on the kind of the beginning of this effort, or at the beginning of the effort. And so much more to come. There's likely an opportunity. I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for many of you to engage or to contribute if you're interested. All right, and then the last slide here before we break for questions is just to share this, go back to this point about we were just approved to hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion research grade scientist position at the Institute. That's all moving forward. We're just working through the kind of the bureaucratic or administrative process to get an announcement put together for that position. It's worth saying that, so I've been here since July. The thing that I've heard the most about, well, half a step back. I've been here since July. I sit in regional program manager meetings for most of the bureaus, for the Forest Service, for the National Park Service, for the BLM, less regularly for the Fish and Wildlife Service, but also there. The 2 topics that I've heard the most about are climate change and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And equally, everybody wants to do something to be better, especially in this topic, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What I've heard is that managers, they want to do better, they want to be better, they want to move forward in a more inclusive way, but nobody really knows how, right? And so that's where hopefully we can come in. So the idea that we can hire a research grade scientist who will have as a primary focus of their work to ask these questions about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Hopefully that provides an avenue to not only ask hard questions, but to convene experts around the country to address this topic, or to bring more knowledge to people who can use that information to make better decisions on the ground. And so what we hope to achieve with this work, with this position and this work is to understand recreational experiences, preferences, barriers, incentives for underserved communities. That's just the start. We want to look at relevancy of wilderness to all people in the sense of both what does relevancy mean to different people, and also how can we increase relevancy? What can managers do on the ground to increase relevancy? We want to understand the value of use of wilderness resources by diverse groups. And we intend to assess proposed and existing wilderness laws and policies and ask if they advance equity and inclusion. This one could certainly, well, all of this maybe, but this one in different ways could lead us into uncomfortable places, but remains an important question to ask. And most importantly, through all this work, we hope to improve access to wilderness for all families of all backgrounds in our country. All right, I'll stop there. And that leaves us with, I guess, 15 minutes or so for just a dialogue. And I'll stop sharing my screen. Hopefully that works. And John, I'll hand it to you to lead the way here.
Great, and really appreciate that, Jason. That was some great information. I do have 3 questions in the chat, so we'll start with those and then we'll open it up after that.
Okay.
First one is from Theo. It says, I'm a 3rd-year college student studying recreation parks and tourism administration. I recently got onboarded to a research project studying land management practices on the PCT. Do you have any general tips for being part of a research team for the first time? Which I thought was a pretty cool question for someone new to doing this. So,
yeah, that is a fantastic question. Not one I expected, but a fantastic question. So just a knee-jerk response. One is two thoughts came to my mind initially. One is to ask a lot of questions, and the other is when you have an idea, share it. If you have an opportunity to be a part of a very productive, inclusive research team, the notion that good ideas come from anywhere or anyone should be primary to that effort. And so it doesn't matter if you're there in your first month or you're 30 years in, good ideas can come from anywhere. So I would say listen, ask a lot of questions, take the opportunity to not only enjoy the experience, but to what's the right way to say this, to advance your own career through asking questions and learning from the moment and from the work, and to share as often as you're comfortable sharing, because again, good ideas come from everywhere. I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but hopefully it's a bit helpful.
That's great, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for the question, Theo. Next question from Pete. Are the staffers all USF employees or employees of the other agencies?
Great question. And so it is, so at this institute, at the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute, we're all Forest Service employees. We have, all of our salaries are paid for by the Forest Service. Most of the salaries are paid by the Forest Service. And then we get operational or project funds from the BLM, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Park Service. And so it all blends together in the end. So our funding comes from various sources, but officially on the books, every employee of the Leopold Institute is a Forest Service employee.
I just learned something today, so thanks for that.
Sure.
Let's see, I have a question from my friend Amber from a previous breakout room this week. Do you have staff researchers focused specifically on wildlife within our wilderness boundaries and how they're affected by recreation and visitors? How much focus is on the wildlife and wilderness areas? Those are
it's all, yeah, I will not exactly answer that question, but here's why. So we have a wildlife biologist on staff, Kathy Zeller, who is also here. Has also been here only over a year. She's very focused on wildlife issues, both within wilderness and more broadly than wilderness. So she's a landscape ecologist, and so she, in addition to trying to understand wilderness in relation to wilderness, wildlife in relation to wilderness, She also looks at kind of connectivity issues. So climate change issues, connectivity issues, fragmentation issues between wilderness areas. So thinking about broader ecological conservation needs and thinking about wilderness areas as a part of the broader kind of conservation ecosystem. What she hasn't done yet, and I don't know if this is in her future, is to address specifically the implications of recreation on wildlife. Certainly, she is capable of and has interest in research, in a research agenda related to wilderness and to wildlife. I just don't know about the recreation piece. She doesn't do that now, but whether or not that's in her future, I'm not sure.
Thanks, Jason. I'm going to do one more. Oh, sorry. I'm going to do one more quick comment, then I'll go to you, Bill. It's from Pete. I would like to beg Jason for resumption of Dr. Ken Cordell's research on values and perceptions of wilderness visitors. The 212 values where recreation is in the bottom tier. So just a comment there, maybe not a question, but and then Bill, open it up to you for a question.
Thanks. Hey, Jason. Bill Hodge with the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation. I'm curious, as somebody who believes that the words "in contrast" might be the most important two words in the Wilderness Act, but I'm also not a purist. What role you think partners can have at drawing research into issues that are starting to step on that idea of in contrast? For example, the planting of white bark pine in wilderness areas as for nursery stock, that sort of thing. And how can we, as other partners, marshal like sort of citizen scientists to actually try to figure out what's going on the ground, so that decision makers can actually lean on science as they're making these hard questions with climate change creating so much pressure for ecological intervention.
Yeah, so I have a couple responses, Bill, and at some point we need to connect. And if I don't answer all the bits, bring me back to those points. But my first thought was the survey that's going out. So the it's not a survey; it's an opportunity to provide input on wilderness research priorities. If you get a chance to respond to that, I don't know if you responded to the research questions one that was a month or two ago, but if you have a chance to respond to the research priorities piece, please do, and that will bring your perspective into our dialogue about what our future research needs look like. And there is an open-ended question in that on this web app that we've created, which says basically if your most important wilderness research topic is not on our list, please tell us what that is so we can hear that. So that's one way to get to become part of the conversation. Second is this climate change and wilderness project that I just did a quick introduction to. I think that work will address or try to address some of the challenges that you raise. What do we do about climate change and wilderness, and what are the ethical, right, and almost moral implications of what's in front of us when we think about resisting, accepting, or directing change in front of us. And so there's an opportunity to participate in that work as well. So if you have an interest to engage in that, please reach out and we'll make sure we get you included in that conversation. And we hope many people want to be involved in that conversation. So we certainly want to, I would, without uncertainty, say that none of us know what the answers are to that question, right? But we want to generate a dialogue in a scenarios planning kind of format to elucidate what the outcomes of management decisions might be to basically better arm decision makers. We make this decision or that decision now, what's the likely outcome to be? So anyhow, please be a part of that conversation if you're interested to do so. And then the last thing I think I heard was just about engaging the public. And I'll say that I mentioned that we have 111 million acres and 800 units and hundreds of managers to try to support in stewarding wilderness through science conducted by 6 or 7 people. it's not possible, right? We can't meet all the needs for everyone. And in my past, and in the National Park Service, the notion of engaging citizen scientists for various needs in the park, right? Phenology work was one example on Cape Cod, where we had a citizen science crew that was leading the way. We didn't have the capacity to do this work, but we knew it was important. So I'll just throw out there, I guess, that it's beyond our ability to meet all of the science needs of wilderness. And to the extent that Bill, you and others want to engage and to lead kind of coordinated citizen science efforts to move us forward, I'm absolutely happy to be part of that conversation. Absolutely.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate the answer, and look for an email. Let's get together in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, and just a personal follow-up there, I'm really excited about the climate change work, and I'd like to be involved as well from a Southern region perspective, and some projects we've had and applying the RAD framework, those types of things. I'd love to be a part of that. So got a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to do one of those, then to Pete, and then we'll go back to the chat. So is the research center open to the public or to visit?
Yes, normally, not right now. Yeah. Right. And so we have the same COVID concerns that everyone does, although the rule just changed. I guess well, there's no one in the building right now. And so you couldn't get in. Once we get back to the office, absolutely. If you want to stop by and say hi and just poke around and see what we're up to, sit down with a scientist or me, or take a walk around campus, absolutely. Please come by and say hi. Just give us a little bit of time to get back to something that looks like normal-ish operations.
That made me just realize that that's probably a picture of your office as your background. So
it is the large meeting room downstairs. Yep.
Yeah. Pete, go ahead with your question.
Hey, great. Thanks, John. And thank you, Jason. There was a question in that plea for the continuation of the work of Dr. Ken Cordell. And I guess I'll try to rephrase it, Jason. And that is if you could maybe speak briefly to the interaction of the Leopold Institute with other Forest Service research work units, and maybe also speak to the mega changes personnel-wise that have gone on there over the last 3 years or so. And not to forget about small wilderness. And, my bias is in the East, but would love to spend some time chatting with you about some of the smaller wildernesses in the system.
No, so those are all great. And I'm glad you're here, Pete, because to respond to your question from Tuesday, I asked Chris Armitage about, has there been any research recently that takes a broad look at kind of the values of wilderness from a what do humans or what do people as individuals value most about wilderness? How do they want to engage, or where do they find the most benefit? And he led to me, and I'm sure this is probably Cordell's work, so I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but it's like NRSE. It's the Recreation Survey. Chris said if we're looking at a response on that level, the answer is no. There has been no work done since Cordell's work, and the last time that was done to address that. And I will tell you that your question on Tuesday was probably the 6th time from independent sources that I've been asked, hey, can we revise this NRSE? What is this? This National Recreation Survey something.
Recreation Environment.
Recreation Environment, okay. NSRE then. So we had tried to, Alan Watson and Chris and others had tried to revive that a couple years ago, and it hasn't gone anywhere. But know that it's in the back of our minds, and it's not really our charge to take, but we want to inspire action on that. So hopefully we can come back to that need and move it forward. And I forgot the first part, but I'll go to the last part. So the kind of mega staffing changes at the Institute over the last few years. So in the last 3 years, the people who I call the giants, affectionately call the giants of wilderness research, have departed after 20 and 30-year careers at the Wilderness Institute. And so David, Cole, Alan Watson, Pete, just forgot Pete's last name, Peter. Somebody help me with that.
Landers.
Peter Landers, yes, thank you. And then now Carol Miller, who's been there for 20 years. And so, and we're in this place right now where Sean Parks, our fire ecologist, is kind of the longest tenured at 3 or 4 years. And we have Chris Armitage, who's been a postdoc forever and now a staff person. But we're in this place of transition, which is in part why it's fantastic that we're going through a science planning process right now and reaching out to kind of gain an understanding about where society is on wilderness research needs. Because there's this history on recreation and leave no trace and other pieces that our scientists have led over the years. And I feel a huge obligation to build on the work that they did and with relevance to managers. So yeah, there has been a big change. I will say that everyone at the Institute right now recognizes that history and our desire in 20 years to be looked back upon the same as the people who just departed. And so we feel that weight, and we hope to honor the work that's been done. Pete, there was one question that you had before that. Oh, we're going to close. Running out of time. Did I miss something?
I don't want to cannibalize the few seconds left, but it's about small wilderness and eastern wilderness.
Yeah, no, but that's great to address. So it's worth recognizing that we recognize, or worth sharing that we recognize two things. One, that we need to be more inclusive in kind of the range of sizes and issues in wilderness, and we need to go east of the Mississippi. And so most of the wilderness is in the West, and so we'll probably do most of our work in the West, but we need to be focusing on the East, and we recognize that, and we're moving in that direction. Absolutely.